Deshaun Watson, currently one of the worst NFL quarterbacks playing, and that's statistically, that's in every possible category you could go down. The Browns went to bat for Deshaun Watson. Why? Not because they believed in him as a person, not because they didn't believe all of the accusers and the masseuses that said everything about him and all the accusations were out there. They went to bat for Deshaun Watson because at the time, Deshaun Watson was an excellent professional quarterback. Now, he had sat out a year between playing for the Texans and then that massive deal with the Browns, but you go to bat for a guy that can help you win. And the Cleveland Browns were in desperate need of a quarterback. All Deshaun Watson has done to repay the Browns is have hideous play after hideous play. It's been really bad. And now, the decision to remove Deshaun Watson from starting games on Sundays could be taken out of the Browns' hands. Why, you ask? Because the latest accusation, the lawsuit filed against Deshaun Watson, has been resolved. There's been a settlement with the accuser, the woman in Houston that accuses Deshaun Watson of, it's being described as a cringy date type thing and also could be described as rape or an attempted rape that took place. Either way, more lewd conduct and behavior from Deshaun Watson. Regardless, that's not going to go to court because that lawsuit has been settled. So what does that mean for the NFL? It means the NFL could act. The NFL could suspend Deshaun Watson, could end up leading to the Browns getting out of this massive contract. Does not stop the fact, though, that the Browns right now, and Kevin Stefanski, by deciding to continue to make Deshaun Watson the starter, has probably completely lost the locker room at this point. That is a Browns defense. It's very talented, very good. They're looking around thinking, why even bother with Deshaun Watson playing quarterback for the Browns? That's how bad he's been this year. Jameis Winston, at some point, you got to give him a shot to do something. Or you continue to put Deshaun Watson out there. You get the number 1 overall pick. You go draft a quarterback, Quinn Ewers, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, whoever you decide is that quarterback, and you try to restart the foundation of what you want to be as a franchise. But one thing we know for sure, that foundation is not going to be based on Deshaun Watson. And this latest accusation being settled with the lawsuit could lead to the NFL stepping up and making what I don't think is a very difficult decision, but apparently it is, taking that difficult decision out of the hands of the Cleveland Browns, and the league would do something. Davey Hudson is with us. Davey Hudson has his shades on today, not because it's some bit or some special segment, but because Davey Hudson is playing hurt today with a migraine, and me being the Mike Leach of the show and him being Craig James' son, I demanded that Davey wear the sunglasses to protect his eyes from the bright lights in the studio so he could get through this segment. Davey, thank you for playing hurt with the migraine. I do appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Chad. And listen, I'm in pain, but I'm not in as much pain as Cleveland Browns fans whenever they look at Deshaun Watson, his contract, and what that ultimately means for this team and their future. Because right now, they're still stuck with this guy. Now, they don't have to keep playing him, but they're going to have to keep paying him. And with that being the case, it's really going to dampen the amount of roster acquisitions they can make to where they can put forth a salvageable roster in an AFC North that's not been as great as we expected going into the season, but it's still a tough division overall.
Yeah, and it's one of the worst gambits of all time. It may end up being the worst gambit. Now, the Bears trade with the Panthers for Bryce Young and what the Panthers gave up to the Bears, looking really bad also in terms of recent history. But the chance the Browns took on Deshaun Watson because they felt like we haven't been able to draft the right guy, let's go get someone who's already been really good in the NFL, and then he can be our franchise quarterback, overpaying for him, giving him that guaranteed contract. I've argued this for a long time, and I think we're going to continue to see that it's true. It's not just the Browns losing out on this. With the money, with everything they have wrapped up in Deshaun Watson, it's also the fact that every other quarterback, in a way, loses out on what they want in terms of guaranteed contracts. Because now every other owner, right or wrong, is going to point to this and say, you see, that's why we don't give guaranteed contracts to anyone, even the quarterback. Because the Cleveland Browns were the one team to do it. with Deshaun Watson, and we all see how that worked out. It kind of plays into the hands of NFL owners a little bit that this has backfired so badly on the Browns.
No, very much so. And then when this deal was initially put forward, everyone was like, wow, he's getting that much guaranteed. This is going to change how they do quarterback contracts moving forward. And while the money is still gigantic and massive at the end of the day, I think the other owners, like you mentioned, Chad, are very thrilled to see how this is unfolding for the Cleveland Browns because they realize, hey, this experiment has failed so miserably. I can at least get off the hook for having to be one of the teams that is going to have to pay my guy like this, at least in the near future.
In a weird way, this could end up being kind of a break, Davey, for them if the league comes in and does something, if there's some offset language in the contract, if another suspension or more accusations happen, which there's been reports that that is the case, that they could get off the hook for some of this. Not all of it, but for some of it, if they part ways with Deshaun Watson, I'm sure everyone in Cleveland is hoping that happens. Pretty sure Browns fans right now, they're ready to be done with that. From one cursed franchise to another, the Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets are sort of kissing cousins when it comes to failures in the NFL and claiming that they are cursed. The Jets haven't been in the playoffs since 2010. That's the longest such streak in the NFL. Crazy to think about. But 2010, year 2 under Rex Ryan, was the last time the Jets were in the playoffs. They accumulated what you thought was a great roster with young talent. Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson. Go down the list. Good talent, good draft picks. They needed a quarterback. So they went out and got Aaron Rodgers, guy who'd recently won MVP, won a Super Bowl back in 2010. One of the best quarterbacks in the league, even if he is older. He's going to be 41 in December. With that comes great expectation. Robert Saleh failed to live up to those expectations. I think that's pretty easy to say at this point. Now, does that mean that at 2-3, the Jets should have fired Robert Saleh? I don't know, but that's what Woody Johnson decided this morning as Robert Saleh fired as Jets head coach. He was escorted out of the facility by security, was not allowed a chance to speak with the team, not allowed a chance to speak with everyone. He grabbed his box, and like Milton in Office Space, he wasn't sent down to the basement. He was sent out the door for good as Jets head coach. Robert Saleh ends his tenure with the Jets with a 20-36 overall record. That's the worst in franchise history for a Jets coach that has coached at least 40 games. Worse than Todd Bowles. The worst, which is crazy to think about because you don't think about Robert Saleh being the worst in one of the worst franchises in the NFL. Bruce Coslett, by the way, was the other one that he beat out for the worst winning percentage for a Jets coach. But Woody Johnson, he's put a lot into this roster, a lot obviously into Aaron Rodgers, and he's thinking we got to have a new direction. We want to do something this year. This isn't about playing it for the future. It's about doing something this year. So out goes Robert Saleh. In comes Jeff Ulbrich, the interim head coach, defensive coordinator. Apparently he's widely respected by that Jets locker room. I kind of get my defenses up when I hear this type of stuff about, boy, the locker room loves him, the Jets locker room, widely respected, when it's a team that loses all the time. Because if I'm the owner, I don't care as much about what my locker room that loses all the time thinks about the coaches when I'm having to fire the head coach that those guys couldn't win for to begin with. So I don't know how much I take stock into that, other than if Aaron Rodgers gets along with him and he approves this move, it's probably going to work out okay for the Jets, but they need to win. Monday Night Football, they're going to play Buffalo at home this upcoming Monday night. The wins need to start now as Robert Saleh is out as Jets head coach. I know that our guy Pat McAfee talked about it today. He's got Aaron Rodgers on as a weekly guest. Rodgers will join his show tomorrow. He said that Aaron Rodgers likes Robert Saleh, that he had nothing to do with this. He's always liked him. We'll see what Aaron Rodgers, he delayed his appearance to tomorrow. We'll see what he has to say on McAfee tomorrow. But, Davey, do you think that Aaron Rodgers, if he didn't ask for this, do you think Woody Johnson came to Aaron Rodgers and said, I'm thinking about this, what do you think? And got confirmation from his quarterback before making the move?
I am struggling to see a decision where Aaron Rodgers did not at least sign off. He was at least approached and asked, like, hey, are you okay if we make this decision? And he might, and really all he would have to do is just not fight for Robert Saleh, in my mind. The other thing about Woody Johnson, now he purchased the Jets in the year 2000, but more recently he was the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom. Where did the Jets just play? They played over in foggy London town. And they did not look good in the first half. They made a little bit of a comeback there, but they got beat by Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings. While it's been a great story, it's been a great revitalization of Sam's career. That's still a team, in Woody Johnson's eyes, he's definitely thinking we should put up more of a fight. Now, owners, we were just talking about them with Deshaun Watson. They oftentimes do things that are some head-scratching moves, and most of the time they are more reactive than proactive. And while Robert Saleh did not have a great overall record as the Jets head coach, Woody Johnson felt he had to make a decision to at least spark some life into this team, because if they fall to 2-4, I'm willing to say they're not going to be making the playoffs. And I can at least give him credit that he decided not to promote Nathaniel Hackett to head coach.
Yeah, that was one that people immediately started saying or speculating, oh, Rodgers had nothing to do with this, because if he did, Hackett would have been the choice as interim head coach. I buy into that to some extent, but I'm with you in that he had to have at least been given the option of, hey, what do you think about this? This is the way we're leaning. Are you okay with it? And he probably said he's okay. Saleh recently talked about Rodgers' cadence being a problem with pre-snap penalties. Aaron Rodgers kind of fired back and said, well, you get rid of pre-snap penalties by holding players accountable. So there's been some back and forth, some snipping between Saleh and Rodgers. I got to think that had something to do with this.
Yeah.
Speaking of foggy London town, Robert Saleh now becomes the third head coach to be fired right after a loss in London. Joe Regis Philbin in 2015 with the Dolphins, fired after a loss in London. Dennis Allen, 2014 with the Raiders, fired after a loss in London. So not the first time that's happened.
Well, Chad, you mentioned the Raiders right there. That's another thing I think we'll see more of, is how much control does Aaron Rodgers actually have? Because the big thing out of Las Vegas right now is Davante Adams and him wanting out. Now, if I am the Jets as a GM, I don't really want to trade for Davante Adams, one, for the cap hit, but if Aaron Rodgers is the one making the decision, he's going to get that guy. The other thing with Davante Adams is he's complaining about not getting targets. Well, you have a young stud in Garrett Wilson who's not getting the ball enough as is. I think that's only going to make things in the locker room even worse. So that's something I would be hesitant on if I was making that decision, but I'm really curious to see how at least that's going to unfold.
Yeah, and I mean, Davante Adams, I know he's buddies with Aaron Rodgers, but that's a tough situation to walk into right now. You talk about unstable, the Jets organization with everything going on, which now the question is, what should the Jets do next? So here's been their track record. Since 2010, Rex Ryan got them to the playoffs. Rex Ryan was hired as a defensive coordinator, I think, from Baltimore when he took the Jets job. Todd Bowles comes in, hired after him as a defensive coordinator, took that job. Adam Gase was 23-25 in Miami as a head coach before getting the Jets job. Year one wasn't terrible. Year two was 2-14, a disaster for Gase. He's out. Robert Saleh comes in as a defensive coordinator after that. We now know how that worked out. Not well. If I'm the New York Jets and I'm Woody Johnson, to me there's only one choice of what to do next. It is to go hire the guys, specifically the guy who tortured you for years within that division. I'd hire Mike Vrabel as the head coach, and I'd hire Bill Belichick as team president. And let Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick sort of work together in a Patriot way to build that roster and to coach that team. Mike Vrabel is 54-45 as a head coach. You're not going to do better than that in terms of win percentage of a guy who's been a head coach for that long. We know about Belichick. He won 69% of his games. That's a combined 61.8% winning percentage. That is outstanding for the NFL. You are not going to do better than a combined Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel presidential ticket in New York. Go hire the guys that kicked your ass for years and start kicking the Patriots' ass. You want to find somebody who's got some motivation? Go watch the roast of Tom Brady and watch the interaction between Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick's ready to kick somebody's ass, specifically Bob Kraft's. So if you want to assert some dominance in that division, to me there's only one decision. Belichick, Vrabel. Now, I don't know what Belichick wants. Maybe he wants to stay in media. Maybe he doesn't want to be a team president. He still wants to coach. I don't really know. We know Mike Vrabel wants to coach ball and that he's a ball coach. And working with Bill Belichick is something that I think he would want to do again, and he'd be totally okay with it. And if that was for the New York Jets, to me, that is the way to exercise the demons of your franchise and to go in a completely different direction and start from scratch with those two guys who, one as a coach and one partly as a player, help dominate that division.
Chad, you mentioned bringing in Bill Belichick as the president of ops. The other thing here is it's a rare situation where a general manager is actually finishing out his deal without a new contract. And that's the situation for Jets GM Joe Douglas.
So he's a lame duck. I mean, he's out at the end of the season.
More than likely. But I do look at some of the young talent he's been able to acquire recently, and he's done a solid job in the drafts. And, a lot of times we often see the GM, head coach kind of battle if these guys come in at different times. But, I mean, Joe Douglas was the one that hired Robert Saleh. So I do think that that's not necessarily like a situation we saw when Mike Vrabel was the head coach here. A new GM comes in Tennessee, and then you see some butting of heads. But I think it's a really good plan to go after Vrabel. I'm just curious how much Bill Belichick is interested in just being in the front office versus – because, he said he continues to want to coach, and there's going to be some other jobs open up. I mean, what do you think about just bringing in Belichick as the head coach and just kind of bypassing Vrabel in this situation?
I would consider it. I just don't think that's the route to go for the Jets for this reason. I do think if you're going to bring in Belichick, it's almost got to be this ground up, you're building the mansion for your organization. Like, you can't go into a situation that's already got an established quarterback and leaders and all that. Like, he's got to be the part of that. And then you got to ask yourself, at his age, do you want to start something like that, with Bill Belichick? Is that the right move to go with? That's why I think Vrabel as a proxy is the best case scenario for the Jets. He's younger. He's going to be around a lot longer if things are working out. And you get that guidance of Bill Belichick in the front office doing what Vrabel wants, right? I mean, they're on the same page when it comes to personnel. So, look, that can backfire too, and we've seen plenty of instances with that. We saw that with Bill Belichick late in his tenure in New England. So it's not guaranteed to work, but it's already guaranteed to be a hiring situation where you're starting with a lot more than you have with these other hires that haven't worked out for the Jets, given the track record of both guys. So, look, I'd be all in on that. I also think this move, and Woody Johnson spoke with the media and basically said this too, the offense had a big part with it. He talked about, play calling, and the offense wasn't. They were doing the same thing over and over again, and he couldn't have it anymore. So Jeff Ulbrich, as interim head coach, this to me is kind of a Hail Mary of, all right, I think our roster's good. And to your point, Davey, he's saying Joe Douglas has assembled a good roster. We've got Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. You get the rest of this year. So Jeff Ulbrich, go out there, win me the division, get us in the playoffs, let's make some noise. If you do that, maybe you're hired as full-time coach, even if Aaron Rodgers is done after this year, and we'll start to build with you. And if that happens, maybe Joe Douglas keeps his job. But if what happens is what I think is going to happen this year, that this is a Hail Mary attempt that's not going to work out for the Jets, and while they might make it a little better, they're not going to be a playoff team. If that happens, then Ulbrich's out, Aaron Rodgers is out, and you're starting from scratch. And if you're starting from scratch, give me Vrabel and Belichick.
No, I like that idea, starting from scratch. It's one of those things, too, where you mentioned like Woody Johnson talking about the offense and their woes leading to this decision. How much of that is even Robert Saleh under his control, in my opinion, because we know Aaron Rodgers is the guy that's pretty much, he's your on-field coach and player, and you got his own guy in Nathaniel Hackett. Like, I don't see Robert Saleh hiring Nathaniel Hackett if Aaron Rodgers is not in the equation. So it's one of those things to where it'll be interesting to see how much of that playbook actually opens up now. Was this a scenario where maybe if you were at least going to put the blame on the offense, that makes me think Aaron Rodgers was not getting the authority to do what he wanted out there, and he might have even been more vocal in trying to have the team go ahead and move on from Robert Saleh as head coach when they did.
Yeah, I don't know how much Robert Saleh, how much input he has on the offense. I'm with you that the offensive problem to me is an Aaron Rodgers, Nathaniel Hackett problem. If you've got an issue as the owner, it's between those guys. I think this does set up a situation where now Ulbrich, who's going to continue to be the defensive coordinator, and now the head coach also, this really separates the divide. So now the offense is totally on Aaron Rodgers. There's no question about it, right? It's on him and Hackett to figure out that side of the ball. And part of that would be trading for Devontae Adams. That's what they want to do. That would help them immensely. But now there's a clear separation of church and state between defense and offense because the interim head coach is also the defensive coordinator, and now Aaron Rodgers can be the de facto head coach of the offense along with Nathaniel Hackett. Speaking of head coaches, Zach Taylor of the Cincinnati Bengals, has he put himself on the hot seat? Slow starting Cincinnati. Every single season we talk about slow starting Cincinnati. This is a little bit different than the usual slow starts for Cincinnati because on Sunday they played well. They had it. Joe Burrow was throwing the ball over the place. Jamar Chase was making huge plays in that game. Offense was clicking. They were going to send the Baltimore Ravens to 2-3 and tie them in the AFC North at 2-3. And instead, Zach Taylor went super conservative. After getting a turnover in overtime, moving the ball into Ravens territory, decides that I'm going to run the ball 3 times and kick a 53-yard field goal, which is missed. This happens all too often where coaches settle for long field goals, and I do not understand it. I get that you have faith in your kicker, but when given the chance to get the kicker way closer, you take chances to throw the ball and get the kicker closer. I would not settle for a 53-yard field goal. And for that reason, the Cincinnati organization is a difficult one to figure out in terms of what their goals actually are because it has historically been the cheapest franchise in the NFL. So I don't really know how they're going to make this decision. But, Davey, I feel like Zach Taylor has got to be at least on a warm seat the remainder of this season based on the way this thing has started.
That's definitely fair. We talk about a coach that first 2 years in the league, the team's really struggled. I mean, they were 6-25 in his first 2 seasons. Now, obviously, the quarterback situation was murky there. They were able to get Joe Burrow, and once, he had some time. I know he had the injury early on. He was able to develop. I mean, he led them to the AFC North Championship twice. They lost to the Rams in the Super Bowl, and then the next year they lost to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. So he's obviously been able to get that team to heights, but we saw them regress last season. They finished 4th in the AFC. Now, granted, they did have a winning record, but it's the team's definitely trending in the wrong direction. And at a certain point, you just have to start to really look at the head coach. And there were a lot of baffling decisions made Sunday from a lot of head coaches, but Zach Taylor definitely kind of, maybe outside of Sean McDermott there late at the end of the Bills game against the Texans, yeah, he definitely took the cake there. And I can't blame him for putting himself on the hot seat in that regard. I mean, you're 1-4 and you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. It's just a recipe that, it stays sour too long. It's not going to go well.
I, in part, blame the dye job for Joe Burrow also on this season. Even though he played well on Sunday, that's a highlights. It was a great look for TRL in 1999. It's a rough look for an NFL starting quarterback in 2024. So that's at least partly to blame. Who's to blame for everything going on at Georgia? That's the big question. What exactly is happening at Georgia that leads to yet another player arrested? This time it's wide receiver Colby Young, arrested on charges of battery and assault on an unborn child. Now, it is a he said, she said situation. He was arrested, I think, at 4:18 a.m. His ex-girlfriend came to his apartment. She's claiming, I went to his apartment to talk about our relationship. There was an argument because he was talking to another girl on his phone. Things got heated. He allegedly shoved his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, who was pregnant. Then he locked the door and locked her out of it. Then she got on the phone, and then he shoved her allegedly. He put her in kind of not a chokehold, but a full body hold at one point. Cops responded. They did say there was bruises on her sternum where it looked like she was being held at some point. Colby Young is arrested. So We say this with everything. We'll let the legal process play out on this to find out exactly what happened. But here is what has happened and what is happening at Georgia. They've got a massive issue when it comes to off-field issues and discipline. Urban Meyer is the king of issues off the field. I'm still watching Aaron Hernandez American Sports Story right now. They get into a lot of the Aaron Hernandez stuff and issues at Florida, not just with him. Urban Meyer from 2005 to 2010 at Florida had 31 players arrested on those Florida teams. 31 players. Georgia in 2 years, since the fall of 2022, has had 22 traffic-related incidents alone, and one of those incidents involving death. They've had 7 players arrested in 2024. Since January, they've had 7 players arrested. Greg Sankey's not going to get involved in this. He should. If Kirby Smart can't figure this out, and he's kicked guys off the team, not enough. He's suspended some guys. But if you are running this crazy and you're this much away from the law and you're basically you're wreaking havoc in your own community. You know, Northeast Georgia right now, I didn't realize they led the world in he said, she said issues and drag racing issues. But that's what's going on right now at Georgia. Figure it out. And Kirby Smart's not doing it, and it's embarrassing for the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, another thing that Kirby Smart has in common with Urban Meyer, 2 national championships. And that's why Georgia fans are willing to forgive this. But they just lost to an Alabama team that the next week lost to Vanderbilt. If they drop another game or 2, you'll probably start to hear from some of the Georgia fans that are defending Kirby Smart right now on these issues. They've got to pull it together because they do have a talented team. They're sending a bunch of players to the NFL. Kirby Smart on the field, fantastic. Has done a terrific job with that Georgia program. This has got to change. And if Kirby Smart can't change it, Greg Sankey or someone else needs to come in and change it for him and start suspending players. Let's think about if this Super League happens that we've talked about in college football. If there's some super conference that eventually arises from all this chaos in college football. If there's a central governing body that's run by a commissioner of college football, a Nick Saban type, whoever it is, it'll be handled like the NFL. And the commissioner of the conference will come in, and when there's arrest, when there's domestic violence, when there's road racing issues, when there's any of this stuff, the coach isn't going to be able to say, oh, we had the NIL collective fine them for this. Or, oh, I handled it internally. We ran the stadium stairs. No. The commissioner will levy out discipline at that point. And that may be what needs to happen with Greg Sankey and Kirby Smart. Because, Davey, nothing's changing at Georgia. And the only thing that will change it in the eyes of their own fans is if they lose more games than just the one to Alabama.
As far as I know, we're the only program that's ever suspended a kid for a traffic violation. That's Kirby Smart a couple of months ago. Chad, like you said with the situation involving Colby Young, it's one of those things to where we will let that play out. But from a perception standpoint, there's no way on earth I can give this kid the benefit of the doubt. This is a situation where you look at it constantly being an issue. I mean, Ra Thomas, another wide receiver that was arrested back in July, he's since been kicked off the team. But transfer guy.
Quite the room they have there for the wide receivers when you think about those issues.
And so with
great leadership.
Colby, I don't know much about his situation.
Where's Lab McConkey when you need him?
But with Ra, there had been a few rumblings as far as concerns about his personal conduct and how he kind of handled himself before coming to Georgia. And if you're Kirby, given the culture you have, you shouldn't be taking chances on guys that already have question marks. Yet that doesn't seem to be a deterrent whatsoever. And yet we're seeing these guys come into the Georgia program and continuing to cause havoc. And I mean, the Athens Police Department's busier than any other police department I know of in the entire country. I mean, they're in the news every other week having to arrest a guy, it seems like. So I'm really at a loss for words because there's nothing that's going to be done from Kirby. And the SEC, like this is just going to continue to be a thing we just talk about. Like, I mean, like, clip this, we'll play it a month from now. It's a terrible culture inside the Georgia locker room, but hey, they're winning for the most part. So what are you going to do? Well,
and in what other walk of life do we just say, well, the coach at the SEC media days, Kirby Smart I feel really confident in what we've done with education, and we have more speakers come in than anyone else, and we do this and that. Where else do we just say, oh, yeah, you're right, just kind of throw your hands up in the air. Coach is doing everything he can. He can't help what these guys do away from team meetings or games or whatever. You can help it by bringing in better people to your program that are going to get a message when a teammate dies and someone else on your staff dies. And when there's been 22 drag racing traffic incident type things in Athens with your team, that the message gets delivered. And if not, you got to kick those guys off your team with more regularity. So I'm not giving Kirby Smart a pass. I think he's an awesome coach. He's clearly done very well on the field at Georgia. He's got to figure this piece of it out. Because, like Urban Meyer, let's look at a cautionary tale. Eventually, it got him. Mm-hmm. Eventually, the losses caught up, right? And I'm not saying it's karma or anything like that. It's not Kirby Smart committing these crimes or any of that. There is a slow deterioration within your program that will eventually catch up. It might not be this year. They may be a playoff team with 2 losses or 1 loss. They may go to Texas and upset the Longhorns in a week. But eventually it'll catch up to Kirby Smart if he doesn't completely turn it around. And you turn it around by pulling the weeds. I mean, that's the best way to put it. There are too many weeds in that Georgia program right now, and he's got to start doing a better job of pulling weeds, and that starts in the recruiting process and evaluating not just the talent, but the people that are coming into his program. And until that changes, I don't think any of this stuff's going to change either.
Chad, it's October 8th. I'm going to set the date November 1st. It's roughly 22 and a half days out. Will there be another Georgia player arrested before then?
Based on 7 arrests since January, absolutely. There's probably going to be something else that happens. It's crazy to say that, this will be the one that gets everyone's attention. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean something will likely happen.
Did this coming into the season with the on the bus, off the bus. I mean, it's bound to happen. I mean, we played a game last year, graduated or arrested. Just name a guy off their roster, and you had to tell me if he graduated or arrested. It was a pretty tough game.
It's going to get tougher. Actually, it's going to get easier to play the game because you could always just guess arrested, and you'll probably be right when it comes to Georgia football.
Yeah, the percent's in your favor at this point.
They got to figure that out. Look, there are a lot of good teams in the SEC right now. We talked about it yesterday. It's as wide open as ever. It's very NFL-like, top to bottom right now in the conference. Georgia's not a dominant team, and we saw that especially in the first half at Alabama. They're a very good team. They could very well win the conference, but they're not a dominant team like he's had in the past. So every little bit matters if you're not a dominant team, but you're really, really good. And all those teams at top, when you have multiple issues like this, eventually it will catch up to you. And we may see it this year. We may not, but it'll eventually happen. It's happened for ESPN and Shams Charania. He is the new Wojbomb. He is the new Adrian Wojnarowski. He will be the newsmaker, NBA insider for ESPN. And I think our guy Pat McAfee had a little bit to do with that. Here is Pat McAfee talking about this.
And then like Shams, I'm so proud of you, man.
Hey, baby, Shams.
I'm for him, AJ, for real.
I mean, it makes too much sense. If he wouldn't have gone to ESPN, it would have, come on, what are we doing?
I may or may not have sent that message to a couple people, but, our show is licensed to ESPN. But it was like, hey, we got it.
Built for this.
It's
perfect.
already, don't know what your plan is. Don't know, but it feels like, whatever God, universe you believe it, like there is a prince who was promised.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love jet passing, but let's keep him in baseball.
Yeah, we love Schefter. Love Schefter, too. And, all those things were happening, and we're friends with all these people. And it's like, I don't want to say, what are we doing? Like, this, it's right here. But hands out, just sent a couple. Good dude. Has always shown up for us, too. Work ethic, insane. Absolutely insane work ethic. Got a good one. Hell yeah, Shams.
That's awesome.
Shams Charania, the prince that was promised, according to Pat McAfee. I love McAfee. I think he's a super talented dude. I can't think of anyone that's got a better setup in media currently than Pat McAfee. because he can always just fall back on the ESPN license our show, which is him saying, I can say whatever the hell I want at any given point in time. And I can talk about me texting with executives at ESPN or anyone else, lobbying for them to get jobs. And he's just a third-party contractor, not ESPN employee, for College Game Day. And whatever he wants to do with the company. I mean, good for Pat McAfee and that crew that they get all the benefits of ESPN without all of the negatives with ESPN, which can include forcing certain opinions on their talent, or maybe telling talent not to voice certain opinions on certain subject matters, a la Dan Orlovsky and what he posted about protecting women, protecting girls. So what a great gig for Pat McAfee. ESPN licenses our show. They're just the distributor. We do whatever we want, and we talk about whatever we want. And if I want to talk about lobbying for my guy, Shams Charania, my buddy, my guest on the show, for a job here, I'll talk about it on my show the moment the news breaks. Not a bad gig at all.